Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is going to be a very different type of video than I've done before, and is more of a general tips guide for eBay use. However, I will say this is going to be more tailored to kind of what I use it for, and that's buying and selling movies, specifically things like Blu-rays and DVDs. So I'm going to give you my top tips for buying and selling Blu-rays. Now some of these will be more specific to that kind of type of product, however a lot of this stuff you can use for other things as well. So let's get started. So my number one tip, I've got 5 selling and 5 buying. Some of them may be obvious, but some of them may not be. So my first one, which I don't think is obvious because I think I do this all the time. Now, if you are selling a product, especially if it's one that is native to your country, then sell it internationally. Now, I'll give you a couple of real-time examples that I've had here. So I bought this off eBay eventually, and this was a box set that was in Comic-Con, which is an American convention basically, and it took me so long to be able to find a seller that was willing to send it internationally. And the reason why I say this is because if you keep it to the country of your origin, so let's say for example I want to sell my Army of Darkness steelbook. This is a UK steelbook. If I limit it only to people in the UK, people in the UK have had the opportunity, or collectors have had the opportunity and have had the ease of buying it more so than people who live abroad. So for example, I really wanted to buy that Blade box that I showed you, and I found it a couple of times on eBay, but they weren't willing to send abroad, and I would have paid the price they were asking. And if you have it something along the lines of on an auction, you may even get a higher amount. If you ever look for a particular thing, well, the one I always look for this is there's a German Iron Man steelbook. And if you have a look on auction only, all the lower prices are always ones that are only for the German sort of market, if that makes sense. They're only willing to send inland to Germany. All of the higher price ones always sell internationally. So my advice is, if you want to sell something, especially if it's specific to your country. So for me, if I want to sell my Army of Darkness, which is basically a British steelbook, sell it internationally, because people in America, Germany or wherever who may not have had the chance to buy that are more likely to get the higher price. So that's my tip number 1. Tip number 2, this is more of a general thing I suppose. Think about the time of the month when you're selling stuff basically. Most people get paid at the end of the month, around the kind of, the 30th, around that sort of time of the month. So if you have an auction, for example, that ends on the 25th, people may at that point in the month be a little bit strapped for cash, and I do it myself. So I'm thinking, damn, I can't really afford it this time of the month. So the best time to have your auction ending is at the very beginning of the month, so the first or the second. So basically it kind of goes over that kind of pay date that most people have. I appreciate not everyone gets paid obviously the same time of month, but you've got to think of most people. Most people get paid at their work. They'll be cash rich in basically that kind of the first couple of days, first week or so in the beginning of the month. And I've worked in sales a long time. That's always your busiest time. Then right at the end of the month, the beginning of the next month in sales is always your beginning, the busiest time of the month basically, because people are cash rich. So have your auctions end the first or second, or the very last day of the month basically, and you'll probably get more bids on it. Kind of similar to that, if let's say for example you only want to sell in your country, there is something else you can do as well, is think about the time your auction ends. So sometimes you might be on a day off. Let's say you're on a 7-day auction, you might have a day off, and you do it in the day. You put your stuff onto your day, so say midday or something. The auction will end the same time basically that you start it. However, think about people's generally when they're working. The ideal time to list stuff is going to be in the early evenings, around 7-8 o'clock, because that's when you're going to have the most amount of people at. Again, not everyone will be. This is not true for everyone, but think about most people. If you have an auction that ends at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, a lot of people will be at work. They may not be able to have that last few seconds bid up that you all hope you get. So have your auction end later on in the afternoon, or in the early evening is the prime time. The next one is a fairly obvious one, but I still see it sometimes. Try to avoid using stock photos. A lot of the times eBay will actually suggest you pictures to use. whenever I'm kind of buying stuff, I always wonder if that's the actual item that I'm getting, or is it just someone's just going to collect it, because some pictures will have kind of, some releases will have variant sleeves and things like that, and I wonder, is that actual item? Plus, if it's your actual photo that you have taken, you can say this is the actual product, this is the condition that it's in. You're less likely to have problems basically in the long run. The next one really is really a kind of returns rule, I suppose. eBay actually have a rule that if you sell something and it's returned to you for some reason, unless you state in your description, the return costs actually can fall with the seller. So unless you say something like any return costs that you have are the buyer's, they're basically the buyer's cost to pay, you will have to, you can be eligible for paying the return costs. Now, a lot of people might not have, any returns policy, but let's say the item is faulty, and they can still return it to you. It's still worth saying something along the lines of, if, generally speaking, don't have a returns policy, however, if I make an exception, return costs will be at the cost of the buyer. So that is my 5 tips for selling. So let's go on to buying now. So one of the things I've learned is, over the course of buying a great many kind of DVDs and Blu-rays, look at the country specific eBay. So let's say, for example, you wanted a German release. Go on to eBay Germany. Don't just go on to the ebay.com, which is the American one, or ebay.co.uk. If it's kind of like an Iron Man steelbook, say, it's only going to show you stuff which is basically located within that country, or ones that are, sometimes if they're international, they have international postage. But if you actually want a specific German steelbook, or a specific Spanish steelbook, or American steelbook, or whatever, actually go on to the actual country specific website or version of the website, and you'll be able to see a lot greater choice. Some of these are going to have a similar feel, I have to say. So that's the first tip. The other tip, and this kind of goes hand in hand with that, is sometimes if you are looking for a particular steelbook, or you just want to have a kind of mooch around, see what may be available in other countries, bear in mind the spelling may be different in other countries, and you may miss stuff. And I'm going to give you a live example here. So let's say, like me, I'm a big collector of Marvel Blu-rays and steelbooks and stuff, and I pretty much want to get everything I can, and I wanted to see what other countries had in all the titles. So I went onto the Spanish sites, and I found the Spanish selling the Spanish version of what they call Fantastic Four, Los Four Fantasticos, pretty much there. So this is a Spanish metal pack. Now, if you were to just put Fantastic Four, it's not going to come up on the search, because obviously Spanish sellers are actually spelling it with this actual spelling of it. So for what I did for this one, for example, and a couple of other ones, I could have obviously got a beat on what was actually they were selling it for, and I would put in that spelling, that kind of Spanish, in this case, the Spanish spelling of the Fantastic Four DVD, so I could see what all of these kind of Spanish sellers had, and obviously I managed to pick up some decent stuff which I would have missed had I just put Fantastic Four. So basically, if you are looking on foreign sites, have a look what the foreign spelling is of whatever title you're looking for. Like, for example, the Punisher is just called Cat in some country. I forget which country. I think it's Czechoslovakia, basically. And you can get some, you'll get some quite random stuff sometimes, which you may have missed. And again, this is going to kind of stay with the same sort of theme here. When you do look at foreign sites, what you might find is some of these sites won't. They'll say they'll only ship inland. So let's say we're having a look at a steelbook in Germany, and you really want to get this steelbook, but they said they're only going to ship to Germany. Message the seller and ask them if they will sell, or if they would send it to your country, be it England for me, for example. Now, there's no guarantee to this one, but I found in the past when I've done this, it's pretty much a 50-50. So a lot of the times they'll just have their preferences set on default. So if they're normally selling stuff on, say, the German market, it may just set as default and pretty much just allow them to sell in Germany. However, if you ask, you're going to probably have to pay more postage, but if that's what you want, then just ask. Literally, and I've had probably, 1 out of 2 times that I've asked this, the seller is then going, okay, I'll send it to you. Fine, you've asked, and therefore you get. If you don't ask, you simply won't get, and that is the rule to that one. Now, this one is more of an observation, I would have to say. If you get a second chance offer, let's say you're buying something and you bid. If you get a second chance offer, probably within the first couple of hours, it generally means, or it can mean, there's no guarantee to this, but it can mean that the person selling it may well have had a second account and was bidding, artificially inflating the price. Because I don't see why there would be any reason why you would have a second chance offer pretty much straight away when the item has ended. I mean, I guess it can happen, but I think that probably the chances are fairly low. So basically, if you're bidding on something and you get outbid, and pretty much the auction ends and you think, I lost out, then all of a sudden you kind of get pretty much straight away after the auction, then within the kind of the first hour or so, a second chance offer. It probably means that seller had another account and they were bidding up the cost to try and get as most money as possible. You may still want to buy it, that's obviously entirely up to you, but I don't really like to support unscrupulous behaviour, and it kind of irritates me, so I wouldn't buy it. I'd probably think, actually, I probably can get this cheaper. This seller was just kind of artificially inflate the price. And the final point is going to be a fairly obvious one, but I still feel people fall down on this, and I've seen examples where this has gone horribly wrong. Read the description fully. There's, again, I'm going to relate this to kind of the Blu-rays and steelbooks. A lot of the times, for example, the description will kind of maybe list damage that may not be immediately apparent. I've bought a Blu-ray before, a steelbook that had a cracked inside, and I just looked at the picture in the title and I just kind of bid on it, but I didn't bother reading the instruction, the texts essentially, and I would have noticed. And even there's some cases where you might find it might just be an empty case even. So always just read the instructions to try, I keep saying the instructions, they're basically the text in the description box, just to make sure what you're buying is what you immediately think it is. And then there are cases of eBay trying to deliberately mislead people into kind of buying stuff which isn't actually what they immediately think it is. There's a kind of a quite famous during the UK where people were actually paying for literally photographs of things like Xboxes and stuff like that, and then the way they kind of worded it was kind of a little bit sort of on the sort of cheeky side, shall we say, and it wasn't quite legit, but they had the enough on there to kind of make it stick. Anyway, so that is my top tips for eBay. That's the tips that I use when buying and selling on eBay. I hope you found some of these at least helpful, and I'd love to hear any tips that you guys have had on buying and selling from eBay. Leave it in the comments, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.